Are you looking for a comprehensive Unity tool to manage colliders and room interiors? Now presenting Rooms and Boundary Studio. Fundamentally, this asset gives you complete control over Unity colliders by letting you select, move, add, and delete nodes to precisely shape your border that enable rooms to turn these boundaries into customizable interiors with automatically generating floors, ceilings, and walls using smart triangulation algorithms. Now, are you tired of manually creating your boundary? Simply select all desired game objects and a new boundary will procedurally encapsulate all of them. Once your boundary is created, you can spawn prefabs along the perimeter of the boundary, such as trees, rocks, or fences to indicate where the boundaries are placed. Now, with these boundaries, proximity shaders can be added, making colliders appear only when the game camera is close, keeping your scenes clean and immersive. Let's dive into the features, starting with boundary creation. So I've got a new project here and I've got 4 packages installed. I have the full screen package, Rooms and Boundary Studio, Toon Fantasy Nature, and the free Metal Materials package. And you can get all of these on the Unity Asset Store. Now if you want to create your boundary, just go right click, 3D Object, and go to Boundary. And you can see this boundary appears here. If I bring it off the ground, you can see this is what it looks like. Now the other way is to right click and just create an empty game object and just attach the boundary script. And if I were to raise this up, you can see that a new boundary is automatically created. Now that you've got your boundary here, you can select the nodes just by clicking them, and you can hold down shift and you can select multiple nodes at the same time. Now when you click on a node, you can move it as if it was a normal transform in the Unity world. You can move it up, you can move it down, you can even drag these arrows here, you can drag it up, and you can increase the thickness by dragging these arrows on the side. So let's say you're at a point where you want to add more nodes, where you can click on a node and you can duplicate it by pressing Ctrl and D as if you're duplicating a normal game object. And the other way is to click on a node and then hold down Ctrl, and then this little pop-up will appear. And if you click on it now, then it will create a node where you click. Alternatively, if you hold down Ctrl and hold down Shift, you can see that the red line changes and this dictates which side will be selected. So if I click here, the left side will be selected. If I release Shift, then the right side will be selected and you can go around that way. And of course we've got quite a few nodes here, so if you want to delete them, just click on a node and delete it as if it was a normal game object in your scene. Now you'll notice on the left hand side you've got the hierarchy, and it simply works just in the hierarchy. So you've got the boundary script, and that's the parent script. Down here you've got the node manager that holds all the nodes, and then you have all the nodes here and they have their own transform components, their node script, and their mesh collider for the colliders themselves. So if we were to get this boundary, move it down a little bit, and let's add a new sphere. And if I were to click play, you can see that it rests on the boundary, and you can see how the boundary always updates in real time. Of course, that's enough to get you started, but if you want to edit it more, you can click on the boundary game object and you have all these settings to choose from. You have different tabs. You've got the general tab, the rooms tab, prefabs, generate, and settings. Now in the general tab, you have reconfigure that does a hard reconfigure of all the nodes and resets all the colliders again. You've got reset, just resets it to a 2x2 square. And below it, we have convert to box collider. At the moment, it's using mesh colliders. So if we were to click that button, now it's using box colliders. And of course the limitation with box colliders is that the heights need to be consistent. If you were to convert it back to a mesh collider, then it automatically reconfigures itself. So you can switch between the two if you want. Next, you can reset the height to a specific value. You can even add that height to the boundary. Then you can add thickness to every single node, but I'm just going to put this at 0. Now you've got invert. Invert just pushes all the arrows so they're pointing inward. But as a rule of thumb, the arrows should be pointing outward. Next you have snap all and clamp all. Snap all just snaps all the nodes to a grid. So if I were to turn on grid, let's look at it from above and go into this view, and it's going to ISO, you can see that it sits perfectly on the grid. And then you have the button clamp all if I were to raise these up above the ground. And if you click clamp all, then it clamps all of them to the first collider beneath it. And under that you have confirm. If you click confirm, it removes all the scripts and simply just leaves all the colliders in their place. And if you want to edit it again, all you need to do is add the boundary component again and it will reconfigure itself and you can move everything again. You can toggle the visibility and you can also add the floor and the ceiling, and you can see that the ceiling collider and the floor collider is added. On the left hand side on the hierarchy, you now have the ceiling and the floor game objects, and if you disable them you can see they get deleted. Next you have corners. If I put a thickness to like 1 and enable corners, you now get collider corners surrounding the whole boundary. so it just evens it out. Next, let's go to the settings tab. First of all, you can sleep so it doesn't update. You can also disable occlude handles so that the boundary appears in front of other game objects. And you can select split duplicated nodes. When you duplicate a node normally, then the origin is at the node, but if you were to click this button, then the new origin is in the midpoint between the two neighboring nodes. You have display floor and ceiling. If you turn that on, you can see what the floor and ceiling is doing. Let's disable the ceiling and you can just see the floor, and you can also see the triangles of the mesh that is generated. And if I were to start moving it, you can see that the triangles of the floor is constantly changing itself. You also have the button snap to grid. When that is enabled, you can click on a node, and now when you hold down control, you can see it snaps to grid. Now you can see that the mouse is no longer over the actual sphere and it's hard to click, so you can click space and then it will create the node there. And underneath it, you have shift and scroll. If you select on a node and shift and scroll, you can change the height like that, or you can change it to thickness, and if you do it now, it changes the thickness. And down here, you can change the colors of the boundary. You'll also notice that when you click on a node, on the right hand side, you've got a little inspector itself, so you can click and disable it by turning active to off. You can change the height from here. You can even change the thickness from here. You can extrude it so that it just extrudes it out and creates two other nodes. You can clamp it so that it clamps down to the collider beneath it. You can snap it so that it snaps it to the grid. And you can even drag this interpolate slider and it'll interpolate between the two neighboring nodes. So let's suppose I've got this boundary here and I want to convert it into a room. What you got to do is go to boundary, and under the rooms tab, you just got to enable rooms. So when this is turned on, you can see that it's all converted into meshes. And you'll notice on each node, as well as having the node script and the collider, it now has the mesh filter and mesh renderer components. So first thing you can do is you can change the material. So go under wall material and select it to something cool. So let's change it to that. Cool, so I've chosen these materials. You can also change the scale of the material of how it appears on the walls and the floor and the ceiling. And you can see that when you change nodes, it acts in the exact same way, where it just auto configures itself to the best layout it can do. And of course, you can duplicate nodes and you can delete them as well in the same way. Let's go over how to merge nodes together. So I'm going to go reset, and I'm going to reset this boundary. And I'm going to click a node and I'm just going to extrude it out and extrude it twice this way. And let's extrude it twice this way as well. So let's say I'm at a position where I want to merge these two nodes together right here into a single room. Well, I just got to hold down shift and select both of the nodes. Then we got to merge them. And to do that, you just hold Control and M, and then that will merge both of them together. And in doing so, it will create two boundaries. It will create the outer boundary, which is the one around here. And then you've got the inner boundary, which is this boundary here. So when I click on the inner boundary, when I move it, you can see it completely joins up with the floor and the ceiling of the other boundary. So what if you want to add holes in the floor and the ceiling? Well, I've just got this to begin with and I'm going to expand it out. So the trick to making holes is to add a smaller boundary into the bigger boundary. So let's duplicate this boundary. So now we've got two boundaries. I'm going to reset the new boundary, and you can see that the outer boundary, the old boundary, has kind of disappeared. So I'm just going to click reconfigure and that will bring it back again. Now with the smaller boundary, when I'm working with boundaries inside other boundaries, the boundaries on the inside should be inverted. So I'm going to click the invert button. Next, I'm going to go to the bigger boundary and I'm going to include the smaller boundary in the bigger boundaries calculations. So let's go to rooms, and at the very bottom there's included boundaries, and I'm going to click plus. And all I got to do is drag in the smaller boundary and it will all join up. And I can also disable the floor and the ceiling of the smaller boundary. Now if I were to move the smaller boundaries nodes, you can see that it's all synced up to the bigger boundary. So let's say I want to make a hole in the floor or the ceiling. Well, first of all, let's make this disappear. So I'm going to select the smaller boundary and let's go to the rooms tab, and I'm going to disable rooms. So now it's just the boundary itself. Next thing is I'm going to turn off the visibility. So now it's just this. So you can see that we've kind of created an elevated platform in the middle here. But if we want to turn this into a hole, all you got to do is go to the bigger boundary and let's go to the floor and the ceiling of the bigger boundary. And of course you've got node manager, and then you've got the ceiling and the floor. And when you click on these, you can see they select both of them. And on the right here, you've got different settings for them. First thing you'll notice is show holes. So this is probably the most crucial one. Let's go to the ceiling, show holes, and I'm going to click that. And now there is a hole in the ceiling. Let's increase the thickness a little bit and add a bit of a height. And now we have a hole in the ceiling. And let's do the same for the floor, show holes and click that, and now there's a hole, and let's add some thickness in here. And of course, if we move it, then the hole itself will change. So I'm going to bring these a little bit tighter together, and we are going to make another hole. So I'm going to get this boundary and I'm going to duplicate it, and let's bring it over here. And of course, this boundary isn't added yet, so let's go to the bigger boundary, and let's go to rooms, and let's include one more boundary, and drag in our new boundary in. And now you can see that this new boundary is now included. If I were to go down to the floor of the bigger boundary, then you can select which one should be a hole. You can also go show skip, and then you can skip a boundary completely in its calculations. Now if we look at it from the outside, you can see that the hole is being pushed up, and there's the hole down there. There's also the option to make a flat base. If I click flat base, you can see that everything gets flattened into a cube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all these boundaries, and so it goes back to normal, and let's do a bit of a demonstration. I'm going to click reset. Alrighty, so let's create a corridor. So I'm going to click this one and go extrude, extrude, and let's select these two and let's bring them up by 1. So now we've got a bit of an incline. Now I'm going to go here and let's increase the height to like 2 to give it a little bit more height. Next, let's extrude this out and extrude this out by 2 and this out by 2 again and this out by 2 again. Now with this wall and this wall, I want to merge them, so I'm going to click Ctrl M and that will merge both of them together. Next, I'm going to extrude this out and let's bring this up by another 2 and let's extrude it out again. So this is what it looks like at the moment. I'm going to make it go over the top of our existing room here, which means I need to make this one go up a little bit more, and let's extrude this out one more time, and I'm going to extrude this one out as well. Now you'll notice what happens if I keep on extruding it is it will kind of break, and that is because the room is overlapping with the room beneath it, so we're just going to need to do 2 boundaries. So I'm going to delete this node and this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need another boundary, so I'm going to duplicate this one and I'm going to reset this one, and with the previous boundary let's go reconfigure. I'm going to make it the same height as the other one, then I'm going to move across by 1. And now this is the point where we can click on the node itself and let's toggle the active and toggle the active, and now we have made a corridor between them. And now we can easily just keep on expanding. So at this point I'm going to go in settings and I'm going to sleep all of the boundaries just to save a bit of performance. So if you were to have a look at our room that we've just created, you go up here, you can go around here, you can go up the ramp and up the ramp, and then you can go all the way across. At this point I'm going to unsleep all of them because this one here I want to create a hole, so all I gotta do is turn off rooms, let's turn off visibility, and let's go into our bigger boundary, and I'm going to get the floor of the bigger boundary, and let's create a hole by selecting hole, and then I'm going to increase the thickness a little bit so it goes down to like 5. And now if you were to have a bit of explore, you go up and then you meet this hole in the floor, and then you can keep on going up. Alright, so the next thing we'll add is prefabs. So let's first of all create a boundary, and I'm going to bring that boundary over here. And I'm going to create a boundary along this path, and we're going to spawn prefabs along the path. So first of all, I am going to go clamp all, and then I'm going to create a boundary. Alright, so now I've created a nice little boundary here. I'm just going to clamp all and make sure they're all on the ground. So next thing is we are now using the prefab tab. Now it looks very simple to start off with. We just need a prefab parent, and this is where all the prefabs will spawn. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to name this prefabs, and let's drag this transform inside here. Now next thing is the prefab scriptable object. So you go right click, create rooms and boundaries prefabs, and I'm going to call this rocks because we're going to be spawning rocks. Next, let's go over to here, and I'm going to drag this in. Now nothing will happen at the moment because we need to add some game objects. And here, if we click plus, this is the list of prefabs we are going to spawn. So in this case, I know I'm going to be spawning 7 different rocks, and let's get them. So here are the rocks here. Now you'll notice when I start dragging them in, different settings will start to appear, and you don't actually need to tweak them to begin with. It will work just as it is right now. Sweet, so now I've dragged in all of the rocks. Let's go back to our boundary and let's go preview. And you'll notice these blue dots appear, and this is where the rocks will spawn. And then at the bottom, just click spawn prefabs and all the rocks will spawn along the boundary. Now you'll notice that the rocks are very big, so we need to decrease the size of the rocks. So let's go back into our scriptable object, and you'll notice that each of them has a scale type. And if I select this to uniform, well, you can change the min scale and the max scale of the rocks. And of course, doing this for each one is quite tedious. So what you can do is just hide this and go show default settings. And I'm going to select scale type, and I'm going to make it uniform for all the rocks. And I don't know, let's say a scale between 0.2 and 0.5. And I'm going to click apply to all. If we open up the prefabs, you can see that rock 1 has 0.2 to 0.5, rock 2 is 0.2 to 0.5, and it changes all of them. So let's go back to our prefabs and let's clear them and let's preview them and let's spawn them. Now you can see that the rocks are a far better size. And if I were to actually look through the rocks, you can have a look at the scale and you can see it's between 0.2 and 0.5. So let's go through this inspector because there's a lot of buttons here and they can do very powerful things. I'm going to clear the prefabs. First of all, you have enable raycasts. If it's enable, it will spawn the prefabs right on the first collider that it hits. So if I were to get this node here and let's bring it down and let's go back in, you can see that if enable raycast is turned off, then the prefabs will spawn at the bottom of the boundary all the way through. But if I were to enable it and turn it on, you can see that it spawns on the surface of the terrain collider. Next, you have raycast multiplier. And if I were to decrease this, you can see that the raycast length is decreased. So you can see that the origin of the raycast is at the very top of the boundary, and as we increase it, then it fires raycast down towards the ground. If I were to bring this to 0, you can also change the starting offset, and this is where the raycast should start. For example, I have got a cube here, and I am going to put it inside the boundary. And you will notice that because the raycasts are firing downwards, then it hits the cube itself. But let's say we want to hit the terrain instead. Well, let's get our raycast multiplier and let's set it to 0. And then we get the offset and we bring the offset down until it is just past the cube. And then it's increased the raycast multiplier. So now it bypasses the cube. Next you have the layer mask for which the raycasts are fired down at. And then you have spawner nodes. If this is ticked, then the prefabs will only spawn at the node locations. And here you've got prefab spawn, whether it should be the top or the bottom. Just set it to top if you want to spawn like stalactites on the ceiling, and then set it to bottom if you want to do terrain objects. And of course you've got spawn distance, and this is the distance of which the prefabs will spawn from each other. So let's go through more of the settings. You have the prefab itself over here. You have the height offset. If this is set to something high, then the prefabs will spawn off the ground. You've got minimum distance, and this is the minimum distance that a prefab can spawn from one another. And if you want, you can click reset, and reset will set this minimum distance to the bounds of the mesh itself. Then you have rotation type. So if I were to tick this, and let's go random, and let's make it a random value between like 180 and 180, and I'm going to click apply to all, and then let's go spawn prefabs. And now all these rocks, if we were to have a look through them, you can see not only do they have a random scale, but they have a random rotation as well. Now let's suppose you want to spawn fences along the boundary. How do you do that? Well, let's go clear, and first thing I'm going to do is we don't need rocks anymore, so I'm going to create another one. And with this one, I'm going to drag in 2. I'm going to drag in post 1 and post 2. Then I'm going to drag my fence post scriptable object into here, and let's go clear, preview, and spawn. And now I've got fence posts spawning across the boundary. Now I want to connect them together. So down here we have connector parent, and I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to call this connectors. Then I'm going to drag the connector parent inside it. And now let's get a bunch of connectors in. Let's go into our prefabs, and I'm going to get connector 1 and connector 2. Then I'm going to click connect prefabs. And you can see it tries to connect them. First off, it is too high, so I'm going to decrease the height to a random value between 0.6 and 0.7. And let's go connect again. And you'll notice that it overshoots it a little bit. Now, why does this happen? Well, let's go into the connector itself. The first important thing is the Z axis. It needs to be alongside the direction where the connectors should connect. And then the second thing you'll notice is this is nearly 2 units wide. If I were to go into isometric, you can see that this connector is almost 2 units wide, which means that we need to scale down them a little bit. So let's go to our Z scale multiplier, and I'm going to halve it because our connector is 2 units wide. Go connect prefabs, and now you can see they're all connected. And just like that, we have created a fence alongside our boundary. Next, how do you generate a boundary from scratch? Well, this is going to use the Generate tab. All you got to do is lock the boundary and select the game objects you'd like to generate around. And it will preview around these selected objects with the heights matching the meshes. And then you go Generate, and you can see it generates a boundary around them. So let's add a few more objects in. I'm going to add these rocks in. Let's add the stump, and we'll add the logs in as well. And there's this log as well. So I'm going to click preview, and you can see it tries to create a boundary. What you can do is change the seed of it until you get it to a good seed that you like. Sweet, so I like this seed that's created. And you can also change the offset if you want to bring it further or away. And then let's go generate, and it generates a boundary around these meshes. And you'll see that there is a surround mesh button. If the object you've selected has a mesh filter, then it will surround the boundary around the mesh in the mesh filter component. And of course afterwards, if you're like, oh, this is a little bit too short, of course you can increase the heights of them. You can go down here and just go add 1 to all the heights, and then that will do that. The last aspect of Rooms in Boundary Studio is shaders. You can go create a material, and I'm going to change the material shader. If you select here, you can go boundaries, and in this case, I'm going to choose a URP unlit boundary. And you'll notice there's a few settings. The best setting is transparent. When you turn that on and drag it over, you can see that this now appears. And of course, it's a little bit too big, so I can increase the texture scale, let's say to 1010, and let's make it scroll. So I'm going to add a scroll speed of 0.1. Next at the bottom, you have the min and max distance. If I increase the max distance, let's say to like 20, you can see that at 20 units, the boundary completely disappears. And when I get closer, then it slowly reappears. And min distance is the distance where the boundary is fully visible. So if I were to set this to exactly 20, you can see it should fade in very quickly. And if you want to save performance and use opaque shaders, you can just select opaque and turn on alpha clipping as well. And let's increase the threshold to something very small. And you can say it works in the same way, except you don't get the fade in effect. And of course, it comes with a bunch of different shapes to choose from. You've got circle, diagonal, dots, and you've got other crosses as well. So let's quickly go over how you would do this on an actual boundary. So what you need to do is enable rooms, and then this will convert everything to materials. And all you need to do is drag in the wall material, and it appears everywhere. And let's just tweak this to make it transparent, turn off alpha clipping, disable the alpha threshold, and then get the max distance and put it to something like 10. And now we've done all those settings, let's go back into our boundary and let's go reconfigure, and it will reconfigure everything. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, something like 5. So now it's a bit more subtle. As I get closer to the boundary, you can see that the X's start to appear. And of course you can change this to any texture that you want, so you can put in custom textures to your proximity shaders. So all the features that you've seen here, you can get it on the Unity Asset Store.